a day, in and out, in and out. The Holy Father's prayer life was remarkably deep. This was a true mystic in the Catholic Church, this gift that we have of John Paul the Great. I have met so many priests and bishops and lay people who knew him so personally. The story, I mean, I could go on and spend an hour and a half just talking about the prayerfulness of this man, but he had a simplicity, a holiness about him. A lot of people don't know, like when he was in Rio de Janeiro, he wanted to go to the barrios, to the poorest of the poor, and he was meeting with his poor mother with all these kids, and he had nothing to give her, so he's like, oh, what can I give you? The ring Pope Paul VI gave me as Pope. Took it off his hand and gave it to this poor woman so she could take care of his family. The people who he lived with said we couldn't give him clothing. They said he would wear his undershirts and underwear until they had holes in them. And when they had holes, he gave them to us and said, can you put a patch in this? And she said we tried to give him new clothes, and he would sneak it over to the housekeeper and said, give this to the poor. And he would live under these beautiful papal vestments in absolute poverty. He would wear shoes until they had holes through the bottom of them, and they had to beg him to get new ones. When a poor man came once to his rectory in Poland, and it was banging on the door asking for a handout, and he told one of the ladies, housemaid, said, oh, well, just bring him up to my closet, take whatever you want, clean it out. And he would always insist the new stuff be given to the poor, the old stuff is for him. And so this man of incredible detachment, he had this Eucharistic life that I would recommend follow his advice. Make your life intensely Eucharistic. Spend time in adoration, because it is before the presence of God that your identity is revealed to you. He knows more about you than yourself. A person once asked me, what is a saint? And I said, well, the saint is like the full bloom of the human personality. You look at the saints, they're so remarkably unique. You look at unrepentant sinners, they're almost identical. Take every prostitute in the world, every person in a Mexican drug cartel, every person in the mafia, they're almost identical. Now line up the communion of saints, and their individuality is radiant. You had folks like, who was it, St. John, was it St. Louis de Montfort? He was speaking at a parish mission. A bunch of drunk people came over, a bunch of drunk guys came across the street, started causing a ruckus in the back of the church, and they disrupting the mission. So he just said, excuse me. He left the mission, went across the street to the bar, and he beat these guys up in the bars. And he just laid them all out, and he went back and finished the mission. And the next day, the parish mission, right there in the front row was all the sobered up guys ready to hear the word of God. Now, Mother Teresa, she had a different approach, when it comes to souls. Hers is a little simpler. I saw her, I remember seeing her on TV in Beirut in the early 1980s. There was a war going on, and she shows up in West Beirut. She goes, I want to go to the orphanage to get the children that are in West Beirut. They said, Mother, that's fine, but you can't go in. There's a war going on. You can't get into West Beirut. And she said, well, I want to go and pick up the children. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And they said, Mother, I'm glad you're a woman of faith, but I don't think you understand. Like, there's a war going on. They said, look, Mother, they killed a priest there last week because he's a priest. They could kill you. She said, all for Jesus. And they're like, oh, how do you argue with this woman? And they said, Mother, it's physically impossible to get into West Beirut. Unless there's a ceasefire, you cannot cross that bridge. And she said, okay, tomorrow's the eve of Mary's feast day in the church, so we'll have a ceasefire in honor of Mary. And they said, look, Mother, I'm glad you're on our side, but don't you think you should extend the time period for God instead of expecting him to solve this global crisis according to the church's liturgical calendar, Mother? And she said, oh, no, I've spoken to Our Lady, and I'm quite confident tomorrow in honor of her we'll have the ceasefire. And so the next morning you see a camera pan across West Beirut at dawn. And then you hear the reporter, we seem to have had a ceasefire of sorts. And then you see Mother, just walking straight into West Beirut, playing with the kids and taking them out.